Hi everyone, I'm Anya Parampil and you're watching Redlines. Well, it's another day, which means another social media crackdown against accounts which challenge corporate media narratives. On Tuesday, Twitter suspended the account of Venezuelan citizen journalist and a friend of the Grayzone, Orlenis. Orlenis is popular online for videos which counter mainstream media reports about Venezuela. She often publishes videos of average people enjoying their life in the country, benefiting from government projects such as the CLAP food program, and in general puts a human face on Chavismo and the people most affected by U.S. sanctioned policy. She had over 200,000 Twitter followers, and this is the second time Twitter has deleted her account. The removal of Orlenis' Twitter page came just days after Facebook and Instagram deleted accounts belonging to well-known Iranian professor, also a friend of the Grayzone, Mohammad Morandi. Professor Morandi joined Redlines from Tehran to discuss social media's latest censorship campaign. Professor Mohammad Morandi, it's always great to see you. I wanted to start just by asking you what exactly happened with your Facebook account. Do you have any idea why they targeted you and why now?
Well, thanks for having me again. I was suspended a few times for photos. One was of myself when I was a volunteer during the war when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, and it's my profile photo on Twitter. So apparently Twitter doesn't have a problem so far. And on a couple of other occasions, again, there were photos where on one occasion it was a former commander of mine who's seriously ill because of chemical weapons that the Europeans and the Americans gave to Saddam Hussein. And again, I was, as I said, suspended for that. And there were a couple of other similar occasions. And then suddenly, a couple of 2-3 days ago, it was just disabled, both my Facebook account as well as my Instagram account. And I think I only had 2 posts on Instagram. So both were disabled. They just said it was written that I was not obeying community standards, and I contacted them a few times and no response. And the interesting thing is I wasn't even very active. I wasn't active at all on Instagram, but on Facebook I wasn't very active. I only usually some of my interviews that are online I would just post there. I would share there, and sometimes some of the things that I'd write on Twitter, I'd also put on Facebook. And I'm not even very active on Twitter. Actually, I've only become more active in the last few weeks. But I find it rather odd, but it's a lot of people apparently are facing the same problem. Many Iranians have lost their Twitter accounts, their Facebook accounts, their Instagram accounts, many in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and in Gaza. So it's not something unique to me. It's something that's happening a lot. My own students, a number of them have been facing the same sort of thing.
This is after these social media accounts claimed they were going to crack down on so-called pro-Soleimani posts, correct? Whatever that means, or pro-Iranian posts, whatever they mean
after that. It did increase after that, but a lot of this has been going on for the last couple of years. So it's not new.
People really have been depending on you for information. I know I'm not the only media outlet or the Grayzone's not the only media outlet. Redlines isn't the only show that's turned to you for expertise in this moment. So hopefully there can be some sort of campaign to get you back online, whereas unfortunately some of these other accounts might not have that same ability to rally the community. When your Facebook is taken down, what exactly happens? Is there any avenue through which you can advocate for yourself and communicate with Facebook, or is the door just completely shut?
It seems that the door is completely shut. At the moment, I still have my Twitter account, and all in all, I don't think I've tweeted less than 900 times. I haven't been very active, but most of what I've done has been on television, and sometimes I write some articles. But I'm still using Twitter. I've been advised to open a, I think, vk.com account. I'm not sure if I got that right. I did open an account, and I am using that, but
Is it an
that's
alternative
just
social media account or social media
yes. I
site?
think
Who
yes,
exactly
it is.
controls it?
Yes, it is. I think I got it right. I think it's VK, but it's again. I've opened that just in case I get expelled from Twitter.
It makes sense that Instagram would follow suit in deleting your account if Facebook did, just because Instagram is owned by Facebook. This is part of the issue when we see the monopolization of these social media companies. My friend, a Venezuelan citizen journalist named Orlenis, recently had her Twitter account taken down. She had over 200,000 followers. This is the second time it's happened to her. Press TV UK's YouTube channel was recently deleted. What do you see as the common thread here? What is offensive content or threatening to these social media giants?
Well, the Americans are doing the same with Fars News, the Iranian news agency, as well as other entities in Iran that have been using .com. So now you can only see or use Fars News on farsnews.ir, and it's been difficult for them. And of course, they could lose their Twitter account any moment too. So it is a difficult situation because the United States and the Europeans are becoming less and less tolerant towards alternative voices, and I think it is a sign of the decline of their power as well. When they're very confident, they allow more debate because they don't feel threatened. But the less their hegemony is all-inclusive, and the more it is questioned, I think the more intolerant they become. And I think, ironically, that actually quickens the pace of their decline, because they are seen to be exactly the opposite of what they promote themselves as, open and so on. So just like the language that we see nowadays in much of the mainstream media or state-owned media in the West, how it's becoming more openly biased and crude than before. Before there was much more political correctness in the discourse. But that has changed a lot, not only with regards to countries like Iran, but I think also with regards to internal politics, as we've seen in the recent British elections, and as we are seeing in the United States as well.
There's almost an irony in the whole situation, because corporate media, establishment, politicians in the West love to say the Iranian regime is cutting off its citizens' access to the internet and the free and open World Wide Web. And then here you have these social media giants deliberately targeting Iranians, removing them from the sites. What do you say to that?
Well, I think one of the things that people in the United States really don't understand is that the social media has been weaponized by the United States against Iran. So, for example, you have thousands of Iranians in Albania who were members of the MEK, which is a terrorist organization which fought for Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq war, during the war between Iran and Saddam Hussein. So this is sort of like people who, let's say, British citizens who were fighting for Nazi Germany. This is how Iranians see them. These are people Iranians who were traitors, who fought for the enemy. They've been taken from Iraq, taken to Albania in a camp. They're not even free. It's a cult organization, and these people are stuck in a camp. They're brainwashed by their cult leaders, and they are using social media 24 hours a day to carry out psychological warfare against Iran. And we also have all other methods and forms that the Americans have been using to weaponize social media. Also, you have tens of very well-funded TV channels in Persian, either owned by Western governments or funded by Western governments, like BBC Persian, like Deutsche Welle Persian, VOA Persian, and then a host of others either owned by the Saudis or funded by the United States and European or European governments. And these TV channels, these websites, these social media entities, they are all being heavily funded to undermine Iranian sovereignty, stability, and to undermine the state. So when the Iranian government uses controls, people in the West can say, it's a closed society, it's North Korea. I've never been to North Korea, but in any case, it's North Korea, there's no freedom. But regardless of the fact that in Iranian society there's a lot of diversity online, there's a lot of access, but I'd like these Americans and Europeans to compare it to what we have now in the United States. It is claimed, although I don't really believe those claims, it is claimed that the Russians intervened in the United States elections. And I haven't seen real evidence.
By creating memes of Bernie Sanders apparently looking really buff, that was how they managed to interfere in our politics.
Exactly. So that has created a crisis of sorts in the United States. But the Americans do not, or ordinary Americans, how would they feel if a foreign country, like Iran or like Russia or like China or any foreign entity, had thousands of people on their payroll carrying out psychological warfare in the United States, had hundreds of TV channels and websites being used 24 hours a day to undermine the debate in the United States and U.S. sovereignty and the state. That's exactly what the United States has been doing to Iran for many years now, ever since the internet has become widely used in Iran. It has become a tool by the United States and its partners, Saudi Arabia, its allies such as Saudi Arabia and others, to undermine Iran. So Iranians, contrary to Americans, they have a lot of information about the West. English is our second language at school. At universities, we study English. Many of our textbooks are translations from English. And of course, many Iranians travel abroad. Many have studied in Western countries, but very few Americans know anything about Iran. So Iran only has one TV channel called Press TV that has been sanctioned. So it's been sanctioned by the United States. You cannot view it on satellite in the United States or anywhere in Europe. Or other TV channels that belong to Iran, all of them are blocked. All of them are sanctioned. Or Arabic channels that are linked to groups that the United States consider terrorist entities, like Al-Manar. It's an Arabic channel. In the United States, a cableman one or two cablemen in New York went to jail for a number of years. They still may be in jail for providing a customer access to Al-Manar TV, an Arabic TV channel. So you can check this online. They have been in jail they were sentenced, one or two people, I'm not quite sure, sentenced to 15 years in jail and a huge fine. And then I think ultimately agreed that they'd go to jail for like 8 or 9 years. I don't know if they're still in jail or that person is still in jail or not. So the United States, which is not at all threatened by Iran, carries out these restrictions. Yet the United States, which and its allies, which are attacking Iran and carrying out a psychological warfare campaign against Iran, expects Iran not to react. And in the United States, because of what Russia has been alleged to be doing, you have this huge crisis, the ongoing crisis in the United States. Yet the United States can do whatever it wants with regards to Iran, and Iran is considered to be somehow evil. And of course, the narrative on Iran is so negative in the United
Absolutely.
States that even now, if I was to say what I'm saying to you on national TV, I'm sure many Americans would say, "Oh, this is just, this guy's crazy," or he's. And I'm often attacked by people in Western countries because of saying these very same things. But Iran is a very normal country, and those who travel to Iran are almost always shocked at how different Iran is from what it was perceived to be by them before they traveled to the country.
That's exactly what I was going to say to your point. That's why the US government doesn't want its citizens to have access to press TV or Iranian media or hear people like yourself, because then they might be less likely to support war against the Iranian people. And instead, we're supposed to only be fed the streams of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, which are overwhelmingly pro-war, attacking Iran constantly. That's why I would argue our corporate media here in the United States really is a form of, it's a weapon they use against the people, similarly to what you say the US government does in Iran through its various Farsi-funded channels and media focused on the region. But while I have you on the line, since we spoke a few weeks ago, it seems as though the threat of impending war between the United States and Iran has died down. Here in the US, those of us involved in the anti-war movement are still trying to organize around the issue, keep the momentum going, because we know that the US government could escalate at any moment. But there is a sense here right now that people have forgotten about the tensions which existed between Iran and the US just a few weeks ago. I'm wondering if you can tell viewers what the feeling is in Iran and the region. What's happening, what's going on, because people there certainly haven't forgotten about the US attack against Iranian sovereignty. So what's the latest?
Well, just before I get to your question, I'd also like to point out that Western Persian language media, which beams into the country, is very anti-Arab. And interestingly, Western funded and Western owned Arabic channels that beam into the homes of Arabs in Arabic countries are very hostile towards Iran. So, and Iranians, and it's often quite racist, the things that you see on these media outlets and media channels. I mean, if you replaced Arab with black or with Jew or with any other word or minority, or Persian with the same, in the United States, I think people would be up in arms, or at least many people would be up in arms, and rightly so, because of the use of that sort of language. But we see when it comes to these channels that are broadcast in the region, they're being used to divide the people. They want to create hatred among Iranians against Iraqis, and hatred among Iraqis against Iranians. And of course, Saudi channels and Emirati channels do that 24 hours a day. But so that's, I think, something that has to be, I think a good student could do it. A number of students could do great theses on these topics. But with regards to the region, I think actually things are getting worse and more dangerous, because after the act of war against Iran, the Iranians carried out a strike on an American base in Iraq and created a great deal of devastation to warn the U.S. government that it has this power to respond. And we saw images of the base. None of the missiles were downed by American air defenses, and all of them struck their targets. They were precision weapons, even though they were older models of Iranian weaponry and Iranian-produced weaponry. But also, these were a message to countries like Kuwait, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, that if the Americans strike Iran, next time you're going to be targeted because
Or
you are
Israel.
giving. Well, yes, in general, all of them are vulnerable because they are facilitating the American military, and therefore they will be considered to be hostile entities. And if there is a military conflict between Iran and the United States, the Emirates won't last a day, or a country like Kuwait won't last a day. So this is a sort of warning to Iran, to these countries, to stop this aggressive behavior. But also, I think what the American government doesn't recognize is that the situation in Iraq is getting very bad for the United States. Because not only did the Americans murder a senior Iranian official and war hero who fought against ISIS, probably the most important person in the world in the war against ISIS, General Soleimani, but also they murdered an Iraqi senior commander, the deputy head of the Popular Mobilization Force, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, who also was a war hero, and his people were also killed alongside him, murdered alongside him. And of course, soldiers and others who were fighting against ISIS have been killed by the Americans over the past few weeks. And this has created outrage in Iraq. And as you know, there was a huge anti-US protest in Iraq, millions of people on the streets in Baghdad just last Friday, protesting against the U.S. military occupation in the country.
We didn't see those images in corporate media for some reason.
Exactly. And this is a disservice to the American people because they're keeping the American public ignorant about the reality on the ground in this region.
And do you believe U.S. forces right now are in danger?
Yes, I think they are definitely in danger because the Iraqi parliament has called on them to leave. Iraqis have demanded they leave. They've murdered senior Iraqi officials. They murder Iraqi soldiers. They treat the government with disrespect. They murder at the Iraqi International Airport, the Baghdad International Airport. The Americans treat Iraqis like dirt. I mean, it's amazing that the prime minister tells the U.S., that they must leave, and the Americans say we're not leaving. Or the Iraqi prime minister demands for the intelligence to justify American attacks, and the Americans say we won't give it to you. Or the Iraqi prime minister, the Americans lie about General Soleimani traveling to Iran, the American government, traveling to Iraq, because the Iraqi prime minister said he came to Iraq to visit me. It was a part of a peace mission because the Saudi government sent a message to the Iraqi prime minister about some sort of mediation process with Iran, and General Soleimani was going to see the Iraqi prime minister to discuss the Saudi letter about Iran-Saudi relations. So the Americans in Iraq have lied, the American government, they've lied, they've murdered, they've shown disrespect to the Iraqi government and people, to the Iraqi constitution, with regards to their agreement with the Iraqi government, and they treat the Iraqis as an occupation force. And even the American embassy is extraordinary. It's almost the size of the Vatican. The arrogance of the regime that has such an embassy in another country. It's itself speaking to the public that I am the emperor, I am the empire, I am your overlord. Instead of having a building or a complex, 4 or 5 buildings, they have an embassy the size of a country, the size of a small country in Baghdad, in the most expensive part of the city. So imagine how Iraqis feel. So obviously, if the Americans don't leave, the resistance is going to be much more violent. And the American occupation force right now is much smaller than it was when it had to leave in 2011. And the Iraqi armed forces have been fighting ISIS for years. They're professional now. It's not the ragtag groups or groups with small arms that were fighting the American occupation a decade ago. These are now professional soldiers. So if they go underground and start attacking American targets, it's going to be devastating. They're well equipped. They have everything they need. It's not like 10, 15 years ago. So I think the American government is being foolish by staying in Iraq. The corporate media and state-owned media like the BBC that hide what happened in Iraq from Americans and Europeans, they are doing a disservice to their own people. They're putting their own troops at risk. And remember, if there are 200 people in Baghdad protesting in favor of the United States, we see it day and night on the BBC and the US media. But then when we have 2 million people protesting against the United States, it's not there.
I should add, originally the United States claimed there were no casualties in that Iranian retaliatory strike on a U.S. base, but today the U.S. military said that 50 U.S. troops sustained brain injuries as a result of the attack. And really, it is very sad, Mohammed, because, it's not the children of these anchors in the corporate media or the politicians who are at risk at the end of the day. It is the working class troops that they've sent abroad on lies originally, and then are now shielding the public from the reality on the ground. So it's very frightening, for sure. The last thing I wanted to ask you was just to give viewers an idea of how Iranians in the region are also responding to the news of the so-called deal of the century announced yesterday by President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. It seems as though the United States is going to go ahead and allow for Israel to make its system of apartheid in the West Bank permanent by annexing those territories. How do you see this playing into recent developments in the region?
Well, first, I'd like to stress that I agree completely with what you said about U.S. troops. They are usually poor, from poor families, not well educated because they don't go to the best schools, and they're not from families that are wealthy. They're usually kids who have no other opportunities, and they're basically forced to join the army, whether they're they're encouraged.
I mean, they prey on poor people in the U.S. They show up at their high schools and tell them your only option is to join the military. And
then, they are taught to hate, any entity. I mean, I've seen clips and documentaries about how American troops are trained. It's extraordinary, and you know more about this than I do. But I do feel sorry for them. But at the end of the day, unless the corporate media, unless state-owned media in the West, or unless alternative media shows the reality to the American public, these kids are going to get badly hurt. But with regards to the region, I think, again, this is a miscalculation by the Americans. First of all, the media is, again, even the media that is hostile towards Trump is being very dishonest about the content of this so-called deal of the century. It is very racist, and it is really disturbing when one reads the text. It is very disturbing. But you would not think so if you read the BBC website, or if you read the CNN website, or other mainstream media outlets that I've looked at over the last few hours. You would think it's just unbalanced, but it is disgusting. I mean, the Palestinians it's apartheid. It is apartheid, almost identical to that of South Africa. And of course, Israel is an apartheid state, but now it is becoming openly supported, the apartheid nature of the regime, by the US government. And the media is not raising this issue at all. It's just saying it's unbalanced, or that but what it's doing is that it's antagonizing the public in this region, making it more angry towards the United States. And this comes at a time when the Americans have angered Iranians and Iraqis. They've outraged both Iranians and Iraqis because of the murder of senior officials and war heroes. So they're also antagonizing and angering the rest of the region through this very racist deal of the century that they're pushing. And at the same time, the Saudis are not doing well in Yemen. They've been defeated again badly over the last few days. The extremists that the United States and Europeans and neighboring countries and the Saudis have been supporting in Syria are not doing well. The Americans are not doing well in Afghanistan. They're not in good shape in Iraq. Dictatorships that are bound to the United States are becoming increasingly despised because they're not standing up for Palestinian rights, regimes like Saudi Arabia. So the American government, although we may not see anything happen overnight, but every time they humiliate these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region and other dictatorships that are bound to the United States, client regimes, they are weakening them every time they humiliate them. And at some point, when they begin to wobble, they will just collapse. So it's not as if all these humiliating events that have taken place over the past few years just disappear and go away. They're sort of archived in the collective history of the people of the region. And when the region explodes, it's going to look very bad for the United States. I personally think that this year, 2020, is going to bring about huge changes in the region. And I think that the American government and its allies are going to be much worse off by the end of this year than they are now.
As with many things, when it comes to Trump, his policies seem to have really exposed the ugly reality, which always existed in terms of U.S. imperial policy or direction. But now it's out in the open for everyone to see. And I mean, it's really frightening. I hope we don't see a major conflict, Mohammed, because that's sometimes the only direction that seems possible with the people that we have in power, unfortunately. But we'll do our best to keep educating the U.S. public so that they don't support a war, advocating for people to join the anti-war movement. So I hope there can at least be a positive to come from this moment. If we don't go to war, at least we can be stronger here in terms of organizing resistance and showing solidarity with the people of Iran, because we have more in common with the average Iranian than we do with the people running our government, I think.
I agree. I think the problem is that most Americans know very little about Iran, and therefore any propaganda that's fed to them will be easily accepted, especially because of this, this latent knowledge about Iran that has been created over the last few decades, which is, of course, Orientalist, but in Iran in particular has been so deeply, has been so broadly attacked across the board by the mainstream media and think tanks and other entities linked to this, to the centers of power and to the state or the deep state. Iran has been so broadly attacked, and so I mean it's interesting that when I speak to Americans, the first thing that they talk about is the embassy takeover. They don't even realize that the embassy takeover was a result of tens of years of U.S. oppression, U.S.-led oppression in Iran. The overthrow of the Iran national government, the support for the Shah, the creation of the secret police of the Shah, the killing of thousands of Iranians with the support of Jimmy Carter, who is supposedly the most strongest promoter of human rights among American presidents. But he was supporting the Shah when the Shah gunned down large numbers of people on Black Friday. He gave him his support the next day. And then after the revolution, when the U.S. government gave the Shah refuge, the students took over the embassy. Because giving refuge to the Shah is sort of like giving Osama bin Laden or Abu Bakr Baghdadi or someone else refuge. For the Iranians, he was their monster. He was their Saddam Hussein. This man had killed so many people and had abused so many people in prisons, and then the Americans gave him refuge, and that's why the students took over the embassy. But when you look at school books in the United States, or when you speak to even many educated Americans, they don't recognize that the embassy takeover itself had a context.
No, there is a limited amount of information about the history of Iran and the history of U.S. interference in Iran. That's why your voice is so important right now, and why everyone needs to oppose the fact that your account has been removed from Facebook. Where can people follow you in the meantime?
Well, I do have Twitter, so I still, although I've never been very active. So at the moment, I still use Twitter, and I have opened an account on an alternative outlet, which I named earlier. I think it was VN. What was it?
I thought you said VK.
VK, yes, that's right.
VK.com?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. But you have to check it out. If it's wrong, just delete it from the old
Yeah, that
interview.
looks like a social media account.
Yeah, something. Yeah,
or a social media site.
Yeah, so I opened an account there. But other than that, I just do interviews now and then, or I have the honor of being on your show, or I write here and there. I do teach at the university, so this is not what I do full time.
Even though you are on almost every screen sometimes, so I don't know how you do it. You must have cloned yourself or something.
Sometimes it's very tiring, and it's very tiring.
Well, but I appreciate it.
I feel bad about myself. I feel bad if I don't.
We're very grateful for your commitment, and I'm grateful for your willingness to make time for me, and we'll stay in touch and talk again soon. Professor Mohammad Morandi, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.